So, you're listening to LPs in a Pod. My name's Val,
My name's Eddie.
and this is our first album challenge episode. If you have listened to our last episode, which was the album review for The Future Bites by Stephen Wilson, you'll have heard that at the end of the episode, I challenged Ed to listen to an album, and he challenged me to listen to an album. What did I challenge you to listen to?
You challenged me to listen to Royal Blood's third studio album, Typhoons, which came out 2021 of this year.
And yeah, you challenged me to listen to Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears.
1985.
1985, yeah, 25th of February 1985. Which I know you said before we started recording is quite interesting because we're talking about two duos here.
Oh, yeah. The power of two.
The power of two. Shall we start with Royal Blood?
Sure.
I'm really interested to find out what you thought of this.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think of how I can go through this without sounding like a massive downer, because I didn't really like it. And
Really?
I gave it a chance. I'll show you, even though the people listening won't be able to see this. I did give it a chance.
Oh, so you got the vinyl for this?
Yeah, I bought the pink press because it was on it's the Amazon exclusive, had a bit of a sale. So I honestly wanted to really like it, but I don't know, it didn't come across as very interesting. Like there's it sounds like there's so much potential in this record, but you only feel like you're hearing half the song.
Okay.
And I kind of wish that I don't know, it didn't have the bite. And I thought it was too smoothed over in a way with the instrumentations. Like, I can get what they were doing, but there's so many other places that have done it better. I
Fair
don't know.
enough. I know they took a little bit of a turn in terms of influences for this album because they kind of started to lean into more of the sort of like cheesy disco stuff that I understand they both like.
I don't think it's particularly cheesy. I was reminded of the Manchester band Hertz, and they definitely went to that kind of in that direction with their album Surrender. There's a song called Lights, and that's like got that disco, upbeat synths and stuff, but they're from a pop direction, so it kind of makes sense for them. But even bands like back in the day, like Franz Ferdinand with like Take Me Out, there's that pop element that I just think this didn't quite understand, and I feel it kind of like, yeah, it fell a bit short for me in terms like that. But yeah,
Well, let's talk about what you liked first and foremost. Like, if you can name some tracks
I thought
or some elements of tracks.
Typhoons is the song that I mostly think of when I think of this album. It is catchy, but the song doesn't seem to go anywhere with it, and also a lot of the other songs seem to carry the same energy and almost sound the same in a way.
How do you mean in terms of energy?
Um, there's a very kind of repetitive sound throughout the whole thing, and there were some songs that bled into each other, and I didn't even realize the songs had changed. I think it was if I'm trying to write, oh yeah, from Mad Visions to Hold On, I hadn't realized the song had changed. It felt like the same song throughout.
Do you think maybe it's the essentially like because for me when I mean they've got this is their third album. When I heard the first album, it was introduced to me as, oh, it's just a guy on bass singing and just a guy on drums. It's just two people. And I know they get that White Stripes comparison quite often. But do you feel that potentially it's the trapping of being limited in quite a certain way?
Oh
Because
yeah,
I
yeah,
feel
yeah.
like that was their strength on the first two albums, and I know that on the second album, How Did We Get So Dark, there's a song where he's playing like keys and stuff like that, and they branched out a little bit and had some like female backing vocals. But do you feel that potentially this is because of, is it the case of chickens coming home to roost? Like,
I think they probably bit off more than they could chew for this one. I definitely I do like How Did We Get So Dark, because you can tell they're expanding their sound. They're not trying to do another cut and paste of their debut, which is really good. I think a great rock album cut down to its bare bones, because of course it's just bare bass and drums. But he definitely has an understanding of rhythm, and none of the bass lines are boring, but they do feel like they've washed out with so much fuzz. The grit that came from the original albums, the other two, is kind of gone in a way.
Again, like I understand what you're saying. Full disclosure, when I recommended this to you, I only recommended it because of that tweet that you sent me, and I thought, well, I'm going to be a cheeky bastard and just, tell
Yeah.
you have to listen to it anyway. But
I,
sorry, go on.
if you listen to pop at the moment, there's so many pop artists that are embracing 80s, which I think they can do a lot better, because in the end, disco has always been about the glitz and kind of like soft sound. So Dua Lipa with Future Nostalgia did it really well with songs like Don't Start. I know even like Kylie Minogue for 2020 did a whole album called Disco, and a song called Real Groove, which is just, it seems to capture everything that's celebrated about disco. And I think they were set themselves a challenge to try and fit the Royal Blood sound in the spectrum of that kind of disco sound.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think you've kind of just described a little bit about how I feel about this album. Like, I understand there's a disco influence, but it's trying to fit the Royal Blood sound in with that, and Royal Blood sound has always been it's almost like Queens of the Stone Age. It's very fuzzy guitar. Obviously, you have the whole quirk of, this guy's playing bass, but with however his setup is, I know he plays half of his sound through guitar amps and half of it through bass amps, and he tries to fill that space, but adding that disco element to it as well. I can imagine that would be a big challenge for a two piece. And whilst I won't spare my blushes on this. I enjoyed this album. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first two, but it's still an album that is a bit of an earworm for me. I think it's got some good riffs. I think it's got some good vocal work. The drums for me were a little bit of a step back to Ben's usual sound. He usually sounds like very big, like fucking huge drums, huge cymbals, like some zillion Ks going on in there. I was surprised to hear his drum sound for this album. I felt it was a little bit of a, I don't want to say step back. I want to say his drum sound sounded a little bit muted, but at the same time, I think he did nail that sort of disco era drum sound by doing that. So I get what they're trying to do. I think when you listen to it, it does sound a little bit more disco, but as you've just mentioned, it's like trying to fit the Royal Blood sound in with the disco thing. And those are two very different genres, right?
Yeah, like I remember writing for Oblivion, just the drums just could have had a bit more bite to them. And maybe Royal Blood could have really gone for it and been more daring with it than trying to dabble rather than immerse themselves in a sound they were trying to experiment with.
And I'm glad you picked up on that. But the question I have is, do you feel as though that's the guys in Royal Blood not being as daring, or do you feel as though that is the A&R guys and the record label interfering with that?
I have no idea, so I couldn't say, but they maybe, who knows? I don't even know who are they signed with.
That's a good question. Let me have a look.
I think they're with Warner Brothers for Typhoons.
That sounds familiar. So looking at it, so they were signed to signed to Royal Blood, signed to Warner Brothers Records. I'm seeing on the Wikipedia that another one's mentioned called Black Mammoth. I don't know if that's one of those dealios where they have their own record company after the contracts expire, but they do the distribution through a bigger company. So
I think it's a shame that it just didn't work for me on this album. But it's not to say that I don't think it's a bad album. I just think it's just it could have done a bit more work.
that's interesting.
Also,
What do you reckon the? Sorry, go on.
I also thought Oblivion would have been a better starter for the album in terms of like what was the opening track?
So the opening track's Trouble's
Coming. I didn't think that was a great opening track. I definitely think Oblivion could have done the job a lot better.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know. There's something about when listening for the first time, Trouble's Coming just didn't feel like an opening track for me. In like to start off this album with.
Yeah, I kind of liked it as an opening track. That's interesting because it's kind of got that. I mean, the bass. I mean, first and foremost, I do not know how Mike Kerr manages to sing the lines that he's singing whilst playing the bass that he's playing, because this has that like bass line where he's like do 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 and I mean, I'm shit at multitasking as it is, but like having to play that over singing. I mean, this is a guy who's spent a lot of time with his instrument, and I love that, and I liked it as an opening track. I guess the one track that I have been kind of itching to question you on is Boilermaker, because I think Boilermaker is the standout track for me on this one. I know the video's got Josh Homme in it as well, which I haven't. I mean, you've done the research for you, but I haven't done the research for me. But it's I think he plays on this as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that track is the standout track for this album for me.
I didn't write very much down for it because I didn't like it.
Boo!
I was too obsessed with the lyrics. The lyrics just I didn't write. I wrote lyrics are dumb, so I'm gonna look through the lyrics and why I didn't like them.
But you are being fucking harsh on this, man. Like
I'm trying to.
It's like I said, I like this album. I don't like it as much as the first two, but
okay,
you're tearing this to fucking shreds.
Like lyrics like this got me head like a cocktail shaker, living in a house like an old bodega, got the odds looking in my favor. Starting at the bottom of a Boilermaker.
You know what this album's about, don't you? You must have found out what this album's about.
I honestly I should have done, but enlighten me. What is this album about?
So the album. So Mike has recently celebrated 2 years of sobriety, because he through the interviews that I've seen in, during this press tour. It's all about but he's been 2 years sober, and this album is about him getting sober basically. So they're like head like a cocktail shaker makes sense, because I mean the guy's getting boozed up every fucking night, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's I think once you know that this is his I'm sober now and this is my experience of being an alcoholic or using drugs and stuff like that. I think once you recognize that, some of the lyrics might make more sense.
Possibly, yeah. I suppose especially like in Typhoons, because all these chemicals dancing through my veins.
Exactly, it's things like that. So I was surprised that you didn't know that, because like this is in the interviews I've seen for sure. He has spoken about it at length.
Yeah.
Like he you know, it's that whole, you're a new band, you get massive, you get absolutely fucking huge, and you fall into that rock and roll trap of doing loads of drugs, doing loads of booze. But it's that whole rock and roll lifestyle and the trappings of it, and trying to drag yourself out of that. And that is, once you know that and you listen to the lyrics or you read the lyrics, I think they make a lot more sense.
Yeah, I
so
suppose so.
I appreciate why it was like, well, you know, I thought the lyrics were dumb, but I think once you realize that, they might make a little bit more sense. But we're not here to argue. We're here
Oh
to
yeah,
we're here to
I think I
discuss and
definitely,
debate.
just gave more time to listening to the album than I should have done.
Mm.
Maybe looking at the the goings on outside of it, and especially though I'm sure there's some great interviews.
What do you want to do? Shall we move on to Tears for Fears,
Um,
or is
yeah,
there any final thoughts that you might have about this album?
I definitely didn't like the ending track. All We Have Is Now definitely felt like it was a tacked on song. It didn't fit the rest of the album. It almost felt like it was trying to have like a. It tried to sound like the ending track with all this weight, but didn't put any effort into it. I don't, and then it just ends. It just ends on such a bum note for me.
You know what? Interestingly enough, I feel the same way. I know I recommended this to you in a very tongue-in-cheek way, but I agree. Like it felt a little bit
Yeah,
shoehorned in for me.
I literally just wrote "it just ends" in my notes.
Yes, yeah. It does. I don't
Um,
remember the first time I listened to it. I had that feeling. It was like, okay, it's like when you're listening to something and it's like, why is the next track not come on yet? And then you remember when we were talking about the last episode with the Future Bites, I felt the same way about Count of Unease on Stephen Wilson's album. It just felt like it left me wanting more. It was a bit of an odd way to finish it, but yeah.
yeah, it's like there's a good duo band called the Black Keys, and they did something similar from the album Let's Rock from 2019. There's Lo-Fi is a great example of that as well. But I don't know. It's yeah, I it's a shame. I wanted to like it. I've loved Royal Blood stuff from before, but it just didn't. It just yeah, it didn't work for me. Who knows? I may continue listening to it, and it may work on me because there are some really strong elements to it. It's not a dud, but it didn't resonate as much as I would have liked it to.
Yeah. And I think that's fair enough. And I think we're kind of on the same page. I think maybe I enjoy it a little bit more than you, you know.
Well, it got rave
And
reviews all around. Like I think NME and the BBC gave it like 4 stars and stuff like that. A lot of reviewers, not reviewers, a lot of the critics
critics.
praised it quite highly. But you know, everyone's got their own opinion, and everyone
Yeah.
has their own preference. So I don't
Yeah.
think reviews are too important these days.
By the way, do you know what bodega means?
Bodega? No, I thought it was something that Jim Carrey would improvise. I don't know.
A bodega is generally, in a few different languages, described as like a wine cellar or a cellar or something.
Oh right,
like
okay. I'm sure he could afford a nice wine cellar after his.
Well, I mean, come on, he deserves it. Like, you know.
For a long time, my impression was this almost sounds like it was a made for Spotify album. Like it could fit on any playlist and try to fit with another. Try and fit on as many playlists as possible, kind of thing. Which a lot of musicians are desperate to try and do these days because.
and that's why I asked you, like, do you feel as though this is interference from record company guys, or if
Well,
this
yeah.
is the album that they set out to make? Because I mean, it's like with film. I mean, you know your film. Like it's like the production company will come in and just interfere with everything left, right, and fucking center.
Right. Look at Justice League.
Yeah, you know what I mean. It is so that's why I would be interested. Well, I mean, not that we're ever going to find out, but I would be interested to find out if it was interference or if it was the album that they set out.
Well,
to
sometimes
make.
that does come out.
I suspect it's the latter,
Yeah.
but you know, contracts are contracts, and
Who knows?
the
I think we
industry is as
may.
it is.
It has come out only quite recently, so who knows? There may be some more B-sides or more stuff that comes out eventually over time, especially the rest of this year. So we'll have to wait and see, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about songs from the big chair.
Yeah, the album
by
I
Tears for
challenged you.
Fears.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah. Songs on the Big Chair. So there were initially three stages to me listening to this album. So I gave it a listen the first time. And the first time I listened to it, I thought, "Oh, Shout and Everybody Wants to Rule the World. I've heard these songs. I know these songs." All right. Second listen, I was like, "Okay, cool. I'm liking this." On the third listen, it was like, "Why the fuck have I never listened to Tears for Fears?"
Some straight up bangers.
Like this is a good album. I like it. I particularly love the rhythm section on this album. I'm glad that you recommended this.
Yeah,
Actually,
it's a personal favorite. I can put it on no matter what mood I'm in, and I'll be happy with it just to play. It's you can sit down to it, or you can have it in the background. There's some great tunes, and just yeah.
yeah, and you know what? Obviously, I know you recommended it when we were doing the album review for Stephen Wilson, and it's like there was a moment where I was like, okay, suddenly a lot of Stephen Wilson stuff makes sense. You can tell that he really likes this band through his music. I know there were live drums on Shouts and Listen,
There
and
was,
I know
yeah.
that the drummer arranged the drums on the working hour, but it I mean, obviously, playing drums it's one of the first things I listen for. Is the percussion and the rhythm section and things like that. Also, like Kurt Smith on bass. God, that guy's a good bass player. It's just it was so interesting for me to listen to because there were so many songs where even if it's programmed drums like that typical 80s sort of style programmed drums, that there's I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's every time I've listened to this album, there's always something new that I hear. A lot of that is to do with the drums. Like on, I think it's on Shout. There's that little. It sounds like a little bell sort of sound. So you hear this like, and also the production value of this album, the way it's been mixed. Like every single instrument has its place within the mix. Like a lot of modern albums, it all sounds very muddy. But with this, I've been able to recognize different parts of, different instrumentations, I guess you would say, like with the percussion first and foremost. There's these little rhythms that I can hear that every single time I listen to it, there's something new. But it's the same with the guitars, with the keys, with all the synths, with all that stuff. It was an incredibly rich sounding album to me. I don't know if that's maybe the right word to use.
It was very dynamic.
Yes, yeah, but yeah, I loved it.
What I love the fact is apparently the working title for Everyone Who Wants to Rule the World was Everybody Wants to Go to War. Apparently Roland had considered it an album filler originally, and it was the last song to be finished when they were recording this album.
Oh,
And
really?
it's strange because it's the most like iconic crowd pleaser, especially for their concerts.
And actually noting that there's the live track on this, the Head Over Heels / Broken, which I believe they recorded at Hammersmith Odeon. I thought that was an interesting addition to this album.
Oh, yeah,
When I heard the applause at the end, it's like, oh, is that just a recording of applause? But then I looked it up and it was like, no, it's a live recording.
Yeah, the blending of Broken and Head Over Heels is really, there's a really hypnotic transition. It's so clever. It's done so well, and it's done. I wonder how long they were thinking about doing that, because it doesn't sound like an afterthought. It's genuinely like part of the music.
But it's kind of like a sort of more down tempo version of Broken, isn't it? Like it's the same
Oh, yeah.
riff and stuff, but just played well slower.
But even Head Over Heels at the end of Broken is like layered within it, so they're very
yeah.
kind of intertwined with each other, and that's really cool.
Yeah, and also like it's I love those like like big 80s sounding like drum sounds, like those big tom rundowns. Um and also, whilst you've got those big tom rundowns, you've kind of got this interesting hi-hat pattern going through it as well, which sounds separate to the drums in the sense of, it's separate in the mix. And when I mentioned about the mix, like everything has its own place. And also the fact that you got those 80s synth sounds, but you also have that big guitar sound as well. And also, you know Roland's vocals are quite interesting to me as well.
Yeah, I definitely think we should um, put a link to Rick Beato's "What Makes This Song Great" because he did one specifically for Head Over Heels, and he breaks it down masterfully of like why this song is amazing.
I need to watch that actually.
It's really good.
I mean, I'm not that good at pinpointing certain things that I like in tracks and stuff, but I know that he's very good at that, and that I'll probably watch that and just be like, yeah, this is big. Yeah, I get it now. I'll
link it to you. It's great, and I love it when music producers are really good at breaking down stuff. And I bet a lot of music producers probably love this album.
Yeah, I mean, we would obviously you recommended this off the back of the Steve Wilson Future Bites album review that we did. I when I said I kind of finally get Steve Wilson and the influence that Tears for Fears have had on him. I also understand. I mean, you'll know more about this than I would, but has he remixed or remastered some of their albums?
I think he did it for surround sound for a reissue, and he also did a 2014 mix which was pressed on vinyl once and is very hard to find. I'm still trying to buy it without spending over 3 digits, but yeah, he did a breakdown and made a Blu-ray surround sound song for it. You know what they call it? What is it called?
I don't know,
because he did Dolby now, and what's he doing before then?
Oh, Dolby 5.1 or Atmos or what?
Believe it was Atmos. I'm not sure, but yeah, he's done his whole his own remastered version of it, and he likes to go back to the old tapes and really almost like build the song from scratch in a way. But he's very savvy at it, so.
I found it particularly interesting when I was doing a little bit of research on this, like the working hour. I hadn't realized, although I kind of realized it from listening to it in a way, but I didn't realize that the working hour had 3 different sax players. And that was interesting to me because it was almost like exploring 3 different sax players' interpretation of what should be put in that track.
And also originally that was going to be the title track, like the original title for the album was going to be The Working Hour, and that makes a lot of sense because it's a big song.
I did when I was researching, I did look into why the album was called Songs from the Big Chair, and it was what I could find was Kurt Smith, bass player, had noted in I don't know if it was a review or an interview. Yeah, it was an interview with Melody Maker. He mentioned how I mean, I've got the quote here. So he said the title was my idea. It's a bit perverse, but then you've got to understand our sense of humor. The Big Chair idea is from this brilliant film called Sybil, about a girl with 16 different personalities. She'd been tortured incredibly by her mother as a child, and the only place that she felt safe, the only time that she could really be herself, was when she was sitting in her analyst's chair. She felt safe, comfortable, and wasn't using her different faces as a defense. It's kind of an up yours to the music, to the English music press, who'd really fucked us up for a while. This is us now, and they can't get us anymore. And I found that incredibly intriguing. I'm gonna have to find that film.
Yeah.
Actually.
Well, this is their second studio album following The Hurting, and they got huge from the single Mad World. So they did. I meant, but they dabbled with fame before this. and that maybe have affected how this album came together.
Yeah. I mean, overall, I think the sound is very endemic of the 80s in terms of, the synths and the sort of technology that's going on that you can hear. Um, Interesting take that I have is that
Go on.
there were parts of this album which, I mean, I can only go off reference here, but there were parts of this album that felt very Rush to me.
Oh yeah, in which parts would you say are quite
So,
Rush?
so I would say, so my favorite track on this is Mother's Talk. Um, it's it to me it felt a little bit like it was Rush without Neil Peart.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Like there's a bit of like busy percussion sort of. There's like a busy percussion section with 16ths on the hi-hat, and there's that little bit that drops out on the drums, but you can hear the rest of the stuff. And there's like if you think of like 80s Rush, like Grace Under Pressure and albums like that.
Well, I think
It's
Power.
got those sort of like synth brass sort of stabs, and there's that bit towards the end where it's like the bass line is, oh, that's a fucking funky bass line, like, and I just kept thinking, it sounds a little bit like 80s Rush, but without the drums, like it's programmed drums, and I was like,
Well,
oh, this is good,
well, I thought of Power Windows with the track Big Money. That's very
Yes.
80s.
Yes, that was the other one as well. Actually, I think a bit of Grace Under Pressure and Power Windows. I was listening. I was listening to it, and I was like, "Oh, this sounds like a little bit like."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Coming to think, especially the very when Geddy Lee was more into his synthesizers than he was into his bass guitar.
And I was surprised by that, because I didn't expect them to have a lot of those themes. I don't know what came. It's a chicken and egg situation. What
Well,
came first?
Power Windows was 85 as well. So,
Okay.
well,
So
maybe,
it could potentially be endemic of that sound, that 80s sound.
or
I
a lot of
guess.
musicians were on that same spectrum and experimentation. Who knows? All these
Yeah.
studios may be getting all these new electronic toys. So they're all going, oh, what can we do with this?
Yeah, I suspected that might be the case as well. I think with, I mean, then is it I Believe that's next?
Yeah.
Was also quite an interesting choice because it sounds,
I've just read in the.
sounds a bit loungy, like very lounge sort of.
Well, I've just
You
read.
can hear that. You can hear the ride cymbal doing that sort of thing. And
Well, I've just read in the liner notes, dedicated to Robert Wyatt if he's listening.
who's Robert Wyatt?
Good question. Let me look
Have a
him
look.
up.
Hang on, I'm having a look. English musician.
He rings a bell. I'm sure I've heard of him.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh, he's like friends with Michael Oldfield and stuff like that. If anyone's listening to this and thinking, how can you not fucking know who Robert Wyatt is? Like, we apologize wholeheartedly. Well, he's worked with a lot of the old guys, like Brian Eno, Mike Oldfield.
It's interesting because
He-
it's specifically for the song I Believe.
Yeah. I would also, on the Rush note as well, like the song Broken, for quite a bit, sounds a little bit like a Rush instrumental to me. And I'm only bringing Rush up because that's my reference point, having not heard this album before. But
Definitely in the percussion.
Likewise, the other thing is the final track, Listen, which is to me, sounded very dreamy, very spacey. There were, again, it's kind of one of the tracks that point to me liking the mixing and the mastering of this album. Like that, every time I've heard it, I hear something new in it, which is always a good sign for me. But with Listen, it reminded me of Enya, which I know sounds really bizarre, but I mean, you know Enya. You've heard Enya.
Remind me, because it's not ringing any
You
bells.
know, like sail. You know, like sail away, and songs like
Ah, of course, yeah.
sail away, sail
Ah,
away.
yeah, yeah. It's come back to
Um,
me.
and the reason I had the most bizarre moment while listening to that song for the first time because when I was in primary school, we had this headmistress called Mrs. Davy, and whenever you had to go off for assembly, which is like you get all the year groups going in, they always did it in a uniform manner, and we'd be queued down like this long corridor, and the year groups are going one by one. But Mrs. Davy was like this slightly Stevie Nicks-y sort of hippie-ish sort of woman, and she would always blast Enya as people were walking in, which is a really odd thing. Um, but like when I was listening to it, I just had this memory of like shuffling down this corridor as the year groups went in, and you'd hear something like "Sail away, sail away, sail," like really dreamy, very spacey sort of music.
I suppose that's
Which,
the female vocals that are used in Listen.
yeah, I noticed those as well. Again, it's that dreamy, spacey sort of feel, and for some reason, I don't know. I listened to this track, and it just reminded me of being like 8 years old, queuing up for assembly, hearing Enya blast out as you walk into this big assembly hall,
That's a very
which makes it sound like I'm like being a prick about it, but it has that similar feel to
oh,
me.
it's very specific to you, I suppose. That memory, but
Yeah, it is. So I
it's,
realized that was a really bizarre story. Like when I told Chloe about it, it was just like, oh yeah, so you used to have to queue up in this long hallway and like walk into Enya, and it's like, what the fuck kind of school did you go to?
well, it's the power of music. It can be very personal and taking you back, but
Yeah,
and also
yeah. And I realized. So go on.
it does feel like a nostalgia dripped this whole album. In a way.
Yeah, I mean, as my final thoughts, I'm glad you recommended this. Like I said, it's like, why the fuck have I never listened to Tears for Fears before? This is a great album. I really enjoyed it. There's lots of different elements to different tracks. Like I said, you've got the track that sounds very very loungy. You got the two that I've heard before, like Shout and Everybody Wants to Rule the World. There's so much that this album has to offer, and I thoroughly enjoyed listening to it. I'm gonna pick this up on vinyl because yeah, I've
Definitely,
got
there's
to drop
a
a needle on I've got to drop a needle on this. Um, so shall we bring out our new way of rating music?
sure.
This is LPs in a pod. We have come up with our fancy new rating system, which is that there are 10 Ps in a pod, and how many Ps do you rate this album as? So, Ed, on Typhoons by Royal Blood, how many Ps are in that pod?
How many P's are in this pod? I don't want to be. I feel guilty for being mean about it, but I do think it could have been better. I'm gonna go halfway. I'm gonna get 5 P's in a pod of 10.
Only
Like
5 Ps in a pod.
it was really disappointing. I don't really think I'm gonna be avidly revisiting it. I may try down the line and see if I'm gonna feel differently about it. Maybe I might be in a better, more forgiving mood. But I think they dropped the ball and they could have done something special. I love the idea of bands progressing and going in different directions. No one wants the same cookie cutter album over and over again. But who knows? Hopefully they've gone back to the drawing board, and I hope they can do something better next time. I'm not gonna completely dismiss them and say that their career's over, but better luck next time, guys.
That's a good job. That'd be pretty fucking harsh if you said the career's over. It's not a bad album. I mean, I I would give it maybe 7 Ps in a pod for me.
Bless
No,
you.
I don't. I didn't enjoy it as much as their first two albums, but I certainly respect it and like where they've gone with it. Yeah, I guess that's what I have to say. In terms of songs from the big chair, I'm going to give this. I'm going to give this 8 peas in a pod.
That's respectable.
I again, I thought I'd never heard a Tears for Fears song, but then realized Shout and Everybody Loves the Real World. Both are good songs that I really enjoy. Was really glad that you recommended it. There's parts of the album, especially when you hear a lot of the sax solos. Sometimes I might tune out a little bit, but I would give it a solid 8 Ps in a pod. I'm definitely going to look more into their back catalog as a result.
Oh yeah, they've got a few great collections of songs, and yeah, they did really well. I loved their reunion in 2004's amazing as well.
I'm definitely gonna have to check it out.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
No, honestly, like good shout. Good shout.
I see what you did there.
Oh dear. So you've been listening to LPs in a pod. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Google Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, YouTube. We're going to be on Apple Podcasts soon. We're just ironing out a few gremlins with those guys. You can also follow us on Twitter at LPs in a podcast, and also Instagram at LPs in a podcast. That's LPSINAPODCAST. We've also come up with a companion playlist on Spotify. Ed, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's just any of the songs that we've referenced in terms of what we were influenced by, or anything that was conjured from listening to these albums. We'll put references to particular tracks in my Spotify playlist, just if you're interested.
It's definitely an interesting listen to. I really enjoyed the last one that we did for the last episode as well. I definitely recommend you guys check that out. But for now, though, this has been LPs in a podcast. I've been Ed. I've not been Ed. I've been Val.
Yeah, I thought I was Ed.
I've been Ed, and he's been Val.
Yep. Well, we've been one or the other. I think it's time to take a lie down, Val.
Yep, I'm going to bed.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye. Fuck it, we can leave that in. That was funny.
That was beautiful. And fade.
Oh, nice.